Hello and welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS. As part of a comprehensive news analysis, today we'll be discussing 6 very interesting topics out of the Hindu newspaper. Now, before we begin, as always, you know that we are up with, and the second last session of what we call Target Prelims 2023 is going to be today. And it is going to be reports and indices. Yesterday, we had art and culture, and today, reports and indices. But the last session is actually on Monday, and it will be places in news taken by Chetan sir. So we have come quite a long way from economics to polity to environment to science and technology, international relations, government schemes, and now, as I said, art and culture yesterday night. And today, please don't miss two very important topics for prelims examination: reports and indices and places in news. These three have become very common nowadays in the examination. So I hope that you're enjoying these sessions, 7:30 to 9:30. Today, please do attend this session and enrich your preparation. With this, good morning. Let's start our analysis for today. So when we talk about the topics we have to cover today, it's more or less GS paper 3 oriented. The Sunday newspaper is like that only, no editorial. And most of the papers were talking about the Karnataka elections and the Congress victory. But we've been able to scan out and trickle out 6 important topics for your examination. So one is mitochondrial replacement therapy, a very important topic related to genetics and disease vis-a-vis GS paper 3. Then groundwater exploitation, an interesting article about how sinkholes are created by groundwater exploitation also. Then we'll talk about butterfly migration, which gives an indicator of how basically we can see bioindicators and the west to east and the east to west migration of butterflies, which is quite interesting in that way. Then 3 small topics. One, a drug bust, one of the biggest in India till now. 15,000 crores worth of drugs have been seized. Thereafter, a Kerala village, which is now called a fully insured ward. And last but not the least, the parachutes for the Gaganyaan program have now been prepared and have been sent to Bengaluru. So, as you see, it's a unique mix of topics, and we'll try to understand them in their own space of mains and prelims orientation. So, let's start our first analysis, which is the mitochondrial replacement therapy, or what is called MRT. The mitochondrial replacement therapy, it's a genetic or gene replacement therapy. It's been in the news quite a lot, but there's an interesting article which talks about that UK was the first country to allow for MRT, and thereafter Australia became the second country to allow MRT for what we call as IVF, in vitro fertilization, or what we call as fertility treatment in that regard. But now there are basic things which we need to understand before we can go into the details itself. What is a mitochondria? So we know that mitochondria is basically the powerhouse of a cell. So within a cell, you have the mitochondria, and what is the most important aspect of mitochondria is that it has its own DNA. So the cell can have genetic material, but every mitochondria has a DNA or genetic material in itself. So it is present in the cytoplasm, and more than that, it produces the ATP, what is considered the energy or the basic unit of energy in the human body. So ATP is produced, very, very important part of the cell itself. Now, there's something called mitochondrial diseases, wherein, see, because a cell can have its own DNA, but the mitochondria can also have its own DNA. So what can happen is that you don't have any genetic disease, but you have a mitochondrial disease. Wherein because of genetic mutation or mutation of cells itself, certain cells can get affected, and that can be passed on from the mother to the child also during reproduction. So therefore, there are close to 300 genetic diseases which can be passed from the mother to the child because of the mitochondria. And because it is the powerhouse of the cell, it is there in every cell. And the mother's egg cell can contain thousands of mitochondria which have their own DNA other than the genetic material which is there in the egg itself. And therefore, it can be passed on to the child. Now, how does it manifest itself in the child itself? But before that, let's try to understand this concept again. Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell itself, has its own genetic material. It is part of the larger eukaryotic cells in that regard. And the basic point is every mitochondria has mitochondrial DNA. So in the cell itself, you have your basic DNA, but you also have the DNA which is inside the mitochondria. And therefore, there are 2 sources of genetic material as of right now, and the way we see it. Now, how does it manifest itself in children? How does it manifest in children? Or what are the diseases which children can inherit from their mother. So from diabetes to renal disease to anemia to neuropathy to liver failure to blindness to basic standard strokes, seizures and regressions, even deafness, all are related to mitochondrial diseases. Basically, there is no basic problem in the genetics of the child because it has inherited a mitochondrial disease, it starts to manifest itself. There's an 80% chance to a 0% chance to get mitochondrial disease from the mother, but you need to identify that the mother has a mitochondrial disease itself. So, the way we look at it, we'll look at this figure later. Let's try to understand how does this work actually. So, the simple point is you have the mitochondria, we all have it, and it's the powerhouse of the cell itself. Further, you have genetic material in the cell, both in the cell and in the mitochondria. Every mitochondria has its own DNA. So what happens is, for example, that let's try to understand it in this perspective, that when the egg and the sperm, which both have, this also has genetic material, but here you have double genetic material. You have one genetic material which is in the cell, in the egg itself, but you also have the other genetic material which is in the mitochondria. Now what happens is that whilst reproduction, this can lead to a gamete or an embryo which has good genetics. However, it can have a faulty mitochondria. So basically, this genetic material is okay, but the genetic material which has been inherited from the mother, this one has now become faulty, and therefore this child will therefore develop these types of diseases. So the breakthrough which came in 2018-2019 period was that we developed what is called mitochondrial replacement therapy, and UK became the first country to actually allow it for, and thereafter Australia has now allowed this therapy within fertility clinics and what is called IVF, in vitro fertilization. Now, how does it work? The way it works is that this MRT is basically called three-parent baby. Why is it called three-parent baby? Because what happens is that the mother's egg, which has the faulty mitochondrial DNA, they fertilize the egg in the first mother, the biological mother in that regard. And what they do is that they fertilize the egg, take out the parent's genes, which is the genetic material which is other than the mitochondria. Then they take the second woman, which is the donor mother. She gives not the genetic material which is there in the cell, but the healthy mitochondrial DNA, and therefore the egg, the fertilized genes are then placed inside the healthy cell itself or embryo itself, and then planted into the biological mother. So basically it is believed that 37 genes are from the donor mother and all other genes are taken from the father and the biological mother, 1 plus 2. This is coming from the third. So it's a very simple concept, very simple concept. So you have the cell, you have the mitochondria, and you have the genetic material. What they do is that they take out the genetic material whilst after fertilization. Because this mitochondria is faulty, what happens is that they are going to take the genetic material, take a woman who has good mitochondrial DNA, and then put the genes into that mitochondrial egg, which is healthy, and then it is planted back to the main mother. So therefore, this is three-parent baby because the genes are coming from three people: the biological mother, the biological father, and the donor mother. Because the donor mother is giving the mitochondrial DNA. This is a very important point you need to understand, can come in the examination generally. What is the thing which the donor mother is giving? The donor mother is actually giving mitochondrial DNA, and every other genetic specimen or genetic material is coming from the first and the main mother and father. Now, this has been seen as a breakthrough because now we can make sure that children who are at risk are not getting genetically oriented or genetically affected by these things. So just to read out, because you would have to write it in the examination, you can't make it via diagrams. What is the concept? The concept is mitochondrial replacement involves transferring nuclear genetic material from a mother's egg into a donor egg that has its nuclear DNA removed so that the embryo does not inherit the mitochondrial disease. This would allow a woman carrying a mitochondrial disease to have healthy children, and this concept of IVF embryo where we have the sperm, the egg and the biological parents plus the donor egg makes it called the three-parent baby, wherein the baby has the DNA of each of its parents, but 37 genes from the donor. Therefore, the concept is called three-parent IVF, in vitro fertilization. In vitro means that the egg is taken out of the mother and then planted back. In vitro fertilization. Fertilization does not happen within the uterus but outside the uterus. Therefore, what is the quantum of this issue? According to the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority, which is UK's fertility regulator, close to 6,500 babies in UK get affected by mitochondrial disorders, and therefore they develop serious heart and liver diseases along with respiratory problems. And now these children can be mitigated in the way that they don't inherit this type of disease. So the potentiality of this whole concept, MRT concept, is that it can save 10 lives each year in UK in adults, and generally 6,500 babies can be cured even before they get affected. So the US has close to 1,000 to 4,000 babies which also develop this basic mitochondrial disease. And the basic point is this article is a one which we call as an optimistic one. MRT was introduced quite a long back. It has been in the current affairs for quite a long time. The concept is very simple. You have the cell or the egg itself. It has two genetic materials. One is the genetic material of the mother which is there in the cell, and the other is the mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial DNA can be affected. On the other hand, this main genetic material can be healthy. So this needs to be replaced. Therefore, a donor mother gives not the genetic material but only the mitochondria. So this genetic material is transferred into the donor cell, making it plus the sperm makes it three-parent baby. And MRT has shown a lot of potentiality. Less than 5 children have been born with this basic technique. And very simply, this could be the future of making sure that children are not born with diseases which are inherent to them or are genetically given to them through their mothers. And it's a very ground-making concept. So in India, technically as of right now, not allowed. But the point is, it's a very optimistic story, and for you, for GS paper 3, as it is, it's a very important technique which was in the news, and you need to understand it and basically be able to articulate it in the examination. You're not making diagrams, obviously, but basically it's taking out the genetic material out from the donor mother, adding the genetic material of the biological mother, making sure that the faulty mitochondrial DNA of the biological mother is not inherited by the child. So 37 strands of genes are inherited from the donor, therefore three-parent baby. So I hope that you understand this concept very clearly. Simple point. It is the powerhouse of the cell, has its own DNA. Mothers can transfer it in the egg itself. Therefore, children can develop all of these diseases. But the basic point of the matter is this technique tries to mitigate it by removing the faulty and replacing it with the good, what we call as DNA of the donor mitochondrial woman. That is the basic point. So I think this topic is a little bit technical, but I hope that it is totally fine and we can move on to the next one. This is the only technical article, proper pure science based concept was there, and as it is in the Sunday newspaper, you have science and technology, an interesting article in that regard. So generally, I hope this is perfect. Can we move on to the next one? Yes? Okay, great. Okay. Now we move to another GS paper 3 related topic, which is groundwater exploitation. Now the concept of this article is again very simple. I'll again try to be very precise in giving you the summary first, then we'll revise in the end and details we'll add later. The concept of this article is very simple, that there's something called sinkholes. Sinkholes or Joshimath, we saw that there's been basic tectonic activities in the sense that the ground has been shifting because of major what we call as groundwater exploitation and the movement of water underground. So what this article is technically trying to point out, that what we see, the sinking of land in Joshimath, was capturing headlines. Rather in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi and Faridabad, the same type of process is happening, but people don't know about it, and it's related to excessive groundwater extraction. So the concept is very simple, that sinkholes can develop and are developing in a way ground is subducting, it's going down or is showing certain amount of movement because of overexploitation of water from the ground. Because these three sectors, the monsoon reaches the last, and as it is not very consistent. Therefore, groundwater is a very important source of extraction of what we call as irrigation water. So the concept is again very simple. So you have the surface, Now under the surface, you have a major water source. And what happens is that we as humans are going to then go and make a well or a bore well and now start to extract water in the form for irrigation. We start to extract water. Now the concept is that there is a replacement rate. The amount of water which you take out should also be replaced by amount of water which goes to the aquifer. And if you look at it very closely, there is a lot of soil which is basically resting on the aquifer or the groundwater source. So if we take out 80% and we add only 60%, then it is add in the sense there is no rainfall. We can't add it, but the basic point is rainfall and basic replacement rate based in biological or what we call as ecological processes. If the extraction rate is 80% and replacement is 60%, or we are taking out 100% of the water and putting in only 70%, thereafter it becomes a deficit. And this will start to deplete. Now, previously it was believed that oil extraction or what we call as shale gas extraction can lead to tectonic activities or sinkholes. But what we see in this whole belt from Delhi, Haryana, Punjab and Faridabad sector is that the replacement rate is very, very low. So what is happening nowadays is that because the replacement rate is very, very low and the aquifers have become half of or are basically collapsing because of the fact that we have very less water in them, the soil along with it is getting pulled down. And that is why we are getting what are called sinkholes. Wherein the basic ground is sinking because the walls of the aquifer are collapsing. Now this phenomenon is because of overexploitation, and previously it was not seen as a problem. But now there is a lot of research which is happening in this sector which is telling us that this has become extremely acute. It's a very acute issue vis-a-vis now the irrigation land. The land in Haryana, Punjab is sinking slowly but surely because we are not, or in a sense we are over-exploiting the aquifers. And this, till this point, has not been identified as a problem, but the new study which the article is trying to talk about is trying to link this issue, and now we need mitigation for this because this is going to lead to major issues when it comes to what we call as residential places. Because on the same place where we have houses, for example, if the sinkhole appears because the groundwater has gone too low, then it can lead to the loss of life and property in that regard. So the simple point of the matter is, there is an aquifer, you have the concept of the land which is, or the soil which is resting over the aquifer. The aquifer has its own specific space in that sense. We extract it. If we are extracting too much, it in turn leads to the aquifer not getting refreshed, and therefore the aquifer starts to shrink, and when it starts to shrink, it will bring down the soil with it and therefore leads to sinkholes. This is the basic point of this article, and this is what it's trying to technically talk about, which is over-exploitation of groundwater. So very simply, agricultural practices in the northwestern Indian sector are heavily dependent on groundwater for irrigation, and with limited monsoonal rain, the groundwater is very, very precariously low. The water table is very, very low. And in Punjab, 76% of groundwater blocks are overexploited. Chandigarh, it is 64%. Delhi, it is 50%. Meaning, what groundwater they are extracting is not recharged. So there's a deficit in that regard. And what happens is, over time, when the underground aquifers, they will start to deplete at a very, very quick rate and aren't recharged, then they run dry, and that leads to rock and soil from above to sink. Now, this is called properly a man-made disaster. If today something like this happens in this sector where there is a major residential place or residential quarters in that regard and sinkholes appear, it can lead to serious damage of life and property. What this article is trying to talk about is this is the road to a man-made disaster. It's a proper man-made disaster which we are developing in that regard, because sinkholes are dangerous. They appear very quickly and they are sudden. So it is going to be a disaster which is in the making, and we need to mitigate it. So the simple point of the matter is, the overall picture and the way forward is very simple. If oil gas extraction can lead to sinking or subduction of land, then surely groundwater should also have the same role. And this is what a lot of research is being motivated by, that what oil and gas can do, groundwater can also do. And therefore we need to, in a way, put in more research in this area. So the way forward is to first acknowledge that this is a man-made disaster in making. We need to understand the issue. We need to also understand the quantum of the issue. And we need to now mitigate it, because this has now just not become the concept of not having water. It can lead to sudden life destruction, and generally, it is a very major threat to our basic landscape in Delhi, Punjab, and this whole sector in that regard. So please understand this very, very clearly, that this is a disaster in making. The first two topics in that regard were quite technical. This was to explain to you the concept of how sinking sinkholes can appear because of groundwater also. And the first one was about mitochondrial replacement treatment, MRT. So I hope these two topics are totally clear in your mind. Now, very simply, the next topic is also quite technical and related to the migration of butterflies. So we know that butterflies in that regard are very important bioindicators, in the sense that the healthiness or the health of an ecology can be seen from butterflies. If butterflies are not there, it means that the ecology, the biome itself is depleting in that regard. But what we've seen for the first time is that how the milkweed butterflies show so sophisticated understanding of temperature and climate that they are migrating from the eastern Ghats to the western Ghats in the period of the summer season. Now you understand something. Migration is done by animals quite a lot. But butterflies were not seen as an example of that. More than that, because butterflies are pollinators. Pollinators in the sense that they carry what we call as male gametes, and they can fertilize the eggs of the female gamete in plants. They basically are pollinators, so it can help, and it in that sense helps the movement of what we call as flora and fauna, specifically flora, from the western Ghats, from the eastern Ghats to the western Ghats, and the western Ghats to the eastern Ghats. Now this is again something obscure. We have never ever seen it previously. But now there are studies which are geotagging these butterflies, and we are seeing a very beautiful form of what we call as migration. This is the basic point here, that we can conserve these butterflies and we can understand how climate change is affecting them also, because if heat becomes too much, there's no point moving from the eastern Ghats to the western Ghats. So the simple point is, there's a recent study which has shed light on the migration of the milkweed butterflies in southern India. And this has a potentiality, an optimistic article, to contribute to the conservation of these butterflies and their migration in the face of ongoing changes in land use and habitational destruction and climate change. That is the basic point. Butterflies can be a very, very good example of how they can actually be a very good indicator of the health of an ecology. So what we see very categorically is that after the southwest monsoons, the milkweed butterflies migrate westwards from eastern Ghats to the plains of western Ghats, becoming active for more than 2 months upon their arrival. So, it is between October and April, most of the milkweed butterflies in the western Ghats congregate in large numbers at a specific site during the winter and dry seasons. And when the summer rains cool southern India, the butterflies migrate eastward into the eastern Ghats. So, it's a very beautiful movement. So, what they're doing is that they're moving from the western Ghats to the eastern from the eastern Ghats to the western Ghats during the summer season. So, they congregate in that sector because it's cooler. And thereafter, once there is retreating monsoonal rain, the migration happens in reverse. So, from the southwestern monsoon period, you have the eastern Ghats to the western Ghats movement. Thereafter, October to April, they will move in the other direction. Now, why is it important? Because these butterflies are pollinators. And in that sense, the whole biome of the peninsular sector, in a way, is dependent or is based on these butterflies in that regard. So, the migration of these butterflies plays a vital role when it comes to the ecological role, or what we call as vital role in the ecology of this sector. As pollinators, their movement impacts the whole ecosystem, and if they don't migrate, it can threaten the basic ecology of that area. And studying the pattern of this migration will throw light on the interconnectedness between plant and animal life. Unraveling the mysteries of this migration is the way we can also protect this ecology. As we know, Western Ghats sector itself is a very, very important biosphere, and therefore we see that how plants and animals are interacting with each other. So, before I go into the prelims bites section, 3 very simple articles but technical articles. Let me try to summarize that for you. The first, we discussed MRT, mitochondrial replacement therapy, gene replacement therapy in that regard. Very simply, mothers can develop mitochondrial diseases that are not manifesting in her, but it can manifest once mutated or passed on to the child. This is a disease which can affect close to 7,000 to 8,000 children generally in the UK. We don't know the quantum in India, we don't test for it. However, now there's a solution for it. And the solution is very straightforward, very simple concept, wherein the 3-parent baby comes into the picture. The 3-parent baby, and the concept of the 3-parent baby is that you have the mother who has the mitochondria which are affected. On the other hand, she has genetic material in the egg, and you have the father who has given the genetic material in the form of the sperm. Now, if these two are going to go together, then what is going to happen is that the baby or the gamete or the child is going to develop faulty mitochondria along with the genetic material of the mother and the father. The simple point is, how do we mitigate it? We add the third element. So what we do is that we take out this genetic material out of the mother, we take out this genetic material out of the father, and we put it into a mother, or what is called the donor mother, whose mitochondria are totally fine. And by placing this, we get the baby which is not affected by mitochondrial diseases and has the gene set of the mother and the father also, but 37 genes out of the donor. That is why 1, 2, and 3-parent baby. This was the concept we discussed in the beginning, which is the concept of mitochondrial DNA. And the concept of mitochondria, the ATP produced, the powerhouse of the cell itself, and it has its own DNA in that regard. The second topic we discussed was the concept of aquifers and sinkholes appearing in Punjab, Haryana, Delhi and Faridabad sector because of groundwater extraction. We know that groundwater is a very important source of irrigation in this sector with very erratic monsoons itself. The aquifers hold on to a certain space within the soil itself, and when we start to extract and don't replace, or the nature is not able to replace at the rate we are extracting it, then what happens is it depletes. And when it depletes, what is going to happen is that because soil and rocks are resting on the aquifer, the soil and rock is going to come down. and that will in turn lead to what we call as sinkholes, which is a man-made disaster in making. Because man-made, because we are extracting too much, we are over-exploiting our resources, and that in turn leads to the concept that this is a man-made disaster in making. We need to mitigate it. We have to stop this over-exploitation at this rate in that regard. Last but not the least, we discussed butterflies and the very beautiful migration of the milkweed butterflies from the east to the west and the west to the east according to the temperature. And because they are pollinators, their movement in that sense impacts the whole sector, because they will pollinate across their first migration and the second migration. And if we don't protect these corridors, if we don't protect this ecosystem, and if butterflies start to disappear, it is going to impact our whole ecology in that regard. So this was the 3 topics, very straightforward, technical, GS paper 3 based, and I hope all of this is clear in your mind generally. Now if this is clear, then we'll move to the next topic or the next period, or what we call as the next section, which is called the prelims wide section. And as you know, here the mains level goes out, and we have to be more factual in the sense it's most prelims oriented. We have to be more precise in that regard. So the first topic in this is the NCB and the Navy seizing drugs in India at a quantum we've never seen. So the Narcotics Control Bureau, along with the Indian Navy, have seized close to 2,500 kgs of a drug called methylphenidine. So this drug is worth 15,000 crores, and it has been just recently been seized at our coast. It was basically for India, Sri Lanka and Maldives. The destination of these drugs were there. And what is more important for you for the examination is that it comes under an operation which is happening, in which NCB and Navy are working together, which is called Operation Samudragupt, named after Samudragupt. The Operation Samudragupt is basically targeting maritime trafficking of drugs and making it an aim to make the Indian Ocean world free of narcotics. Now, where did it originate? Not surprisingly, it has originated in Pakistan, and it was loaded onto a mothership in the Makran coast itself. 134 sacks of this drug has been actually seized, and it has Pakistani inscriptions on it. These bags have what we call as inscriptions, which are basically, or writings which are Pakistani, and therefore the person has been detained and has been handed over to the Narcotics Control Bureau. But for you, 3 very important concepts now appear in this basic article. First, Operation Samudragupt. Second, one of the biggest seizures of drugs in India, 15,000 crores worth of drugs. More than that, where was it coming from? Pakistan. Where was it going? India, Sri Lanka and Maldives. And in the examination, what we expect is you can just get a question on this with reference to Operation Samudragupt. What is it related to? So remember, it's the NCB and the Navy coming together to produce in that regard. Now, the simple concept is, do not overcomplicate it. Don't have to learn the name of the drug, but you just have to remember the name of the operation. Thereafter, we have another interesting article coming from Kerala, which is the Kalangummukal. This is a small ward in the Kollam district of Kerala, and it is mostly an underprivileged population there, which lives there, close to 1,382 residents. And what is now the distinction which it has developed or it has got is that the residents between 5 to 70 years of age, everybody in that ward has now an insurance cover against accidental death and disability. And this in itself is a major achievement because of the fact that every person who is eligible now has it. So they get 1 lakh in case of accidental death, and permanent or partial disability, they will get financial assistance of maximum 1 lakh on the percentage of disability. Now this is a very important concept, very simply. Why? Because this is something which needs to be replicated all across India. So it has started in one ward but it should be then the district, then should be the state. But this is very encouraging because the population was very underprivileged, they did not have the money to pay premiums and generally were quite vulnerable in that regard. So the simple point is, this article again is an optimistic one, and the name of the ward along with the state becomes important for the prelims examination. Thereafter, last but not the least, and after this I'll give you the basic summary of all the 6 articles we've discussed today and then the mains questions, is the Gaganyaan project. Now we know that the Gaganyaan project is a very ambitious project which India has developed or is developing in that regard, wherein we want to put in 3 astronauts into the low Earth orbit. And the manned mission is going to be very, very interesting in the sense that the GSLV Mark III will take off with the capsule, the manned capsule, into the low Earth orbit. It will take 16 minutes to reach the low Earth orbit from Sriharikota. And thereafter, it will do certain maneuvers, and the first and the second and the third stage automatically will be removed, and what will be left is the capsule. The capsule, therefore, 5 to 7 days, it will then orbit the Earth, and we will do certain experimentation under the Gaganyaan project. But what is the most important concept here is, sending a capsule is easy, but bringing it back is difficult. And herein lies the Gaganyaan challenge, that once it has done its 5 to 7 days in space, it has then have to maneuver. It will then start to deaccelerate, which is aerobraking will happen. As soon as it will enter the atmosphere, the aero friction will stop it. But then the most important is that once it enters into the atmosphere, 36 minutes is very critical, all communication goes away, but there's an automated parachute which needs to come up. Automated parachute which needs to come up, and that automated parachute has now been developed and given to Bangalore, which is the ISRO facility in Bangalore. And once the parachute will be deployed, it will splash in the Arabian Sea off the Gujarat coast itself. So a very beautiful way it will take off, it will orbit the Earth 5 to 7 days, and then it will splash back into the Arabian Sea. Now, this is the context of this news. That is why I have given you the basic idea that Gaganyaan project, we already know, is a manned space mission program which ISRO is working with. It wants to put 3 astronauts in the low Earth orbit. But what is the most significant development is that the Aerial Delivery Research and Development Establishment of the DRDO in Agra has now developed these parachutes. Close to 10 parachute array it is, that basically it will be a whole proper parachute concept of 10 different parachutes will be deployed in different stages in that regard, and that has been now delivered to ISRO for testing. So we can see in the next 2 to 3 days, or rather in the next 1 month, we will start to see testing. This is a developing concept. We will see what ISRO makes of it, but we are seeing, we have scheduled what we call as testing in the next 2 to 3 months. So before I move to the mains question, let me summarize what we've done today. Very small, short, but important articles for GS paper 3. First, we understood MRT, the concept of mitochondrial gene replacement therapy, and the concept is very simple there, wherein the mitochondrial DNA of the biological mother is removed, and the donor egg, which has good mitochondrial DNA, is used, and thereafter the fertilized egg or the fertilized genes of the mother and the father are put into that egg so as to produce a baby which is 3-parent baby, because 37 genes from the donor mother also. Second topic, we understood the sinkholes which are appearing because of over extraction of groundwater. Then we moved to the concept of how butterfly migration can be an important indicator of biomes and biospheres itself. The prelims articles, very interesting. Operation Samudragupta, please remember it. NCB, which is Narcotics Control Bureau, plus the Navy are developing that. And it's about coastal, or what we call Indian Ocean world, totally getting free of narcotics. Pakistan, it originated. Thereafter, we understood the concept of the Gaganyaan project. The Gaganyaan project basically putting very significant that ways, three Indians into the orbit and then bringing them back from the low Earth orbit. And last but not the least, we discussed a ward which has now become fully insured. So I hope all of these articles made sense to you. I've tried to give you as much as static in that regard because the current affairs is quite less. It's the static which is more interesting, and now that becomes more relevant for your preparation. So with this, let's look at the mains questions. What is mitochondrial replacement therapy? Discuss the potentiality of this therapy. Very straightforward question, not that difficult. You have to just talk about the process in which I have given you the text also. Thereafter, over-exploitation of groundwater resources is the next man-made disaster waiting to happen. Comment. Now this is where you can talk about both water scarcity, but now I've added another aspect, which is sinkholes, which can appear at any point of time to basically destroy the property, and life can also be lost in this process. So with this, I end the session for today. Thank you so much. Remember, as soon as this session is over, on Telegram, we'll have 5 questions for you ready out of the discussion we've had today. And I'll see you next Friday with CNA. Thank you so much. And do not miss the session in the evening. Like, share and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.